Hello pen people. Here again with another video, unscripted and just trying to throw something out there. I'm talking today about Urushi. Urushi lacquer. The pens you see here are all coated with Urushi lacquer. Urushi is an interesting material. It is a natural resin that comes from trees. And a lot is made about the toxicity of Urushi. It really, once it's cured, it isn't very toxic, if at all. For me, I've had zero reactions to it. A lot of people talk about how it can, cause you to have the same effects as poison ivy or poison oak or something like that. I've never had that experience with it. I've even had the raw Urushi on my bare skin, and I've had no problems whatsoever. However, there are people out there who are allergic to it and extremely sensitive to it, and so they may not be able to handle items that have been coated with Urushi, but that is the exception rather than the rule. Urushi is actually fairly common in a lot of different areas. Obviously, it is a Japanese art form, and when we talk about Urushi, a lot of people think immediately of maki-e, which is this beautiful lacquerware in Japan, and this is a piece that was a gift to my mother when she visited Japan. And it's black Urushi, obviously, with this art done into it. The way this is done is typically that wet Urushi is painted, and then powders are pressed into the wet Urushi, and then it's allowed to cure, and that's how you get these different colors and these in these raised portions of the artwork and the piece that they want to create. I am not an expert on Urushi work. Many of the things I'm going to say today may be wrong, and but they're based on my personal experience with it, and so let's dig into that. So I have purchased Urushi as a person here in the United States. I get this Urushi off of Amazon. It comes to me in these aluminum tubes, and this is the ishime Urushi, which is basically raw Urushi that hasn't been filtered. It's just put into these tubes. You have to, they recommend that you use it within a year of purchase, and it's an interesting material. You can see there, it's kind of a fleshy tan color. It has a rather foul odor too, just in case you end up handling this yourself. It does need to be kept sealed and out of oxygen and away from moisture because it is a moisture curing resin. Anyway, the interesting thing about Urushi, particularly the raw Urushi like that, is that it goes on kind of that kind of tan, that pale pink tan color. And when you paint it onto whatever material you're putting it onto, it oxidizes and changes color, and it can go very, very dark. And so a lot of the Urushi you see is black, and it's not because it has pigment mixed in it necessarily, although that is possible too. But a lot of times it's just the Urushi itself. It's layered on enough that the dark layers become black. One example is this wooden cup that I coated with Urushi. And what you see here is this nice dark, I don't know what color you would call this, chestnut type of color. And this is a piece of birchwood underneath. It's fairly pale, but this is a Finnish kuksa, which is a traditional cup that usually is only coated with boiled linseed oil. But I figured I would just try some Urushi on it to make it a little bit more usable so that it was more resistant to water and such. Anyway, so here on this part where you can still see the wood grain underneath, that's 3 layers of very thinly applied Urushi and then cured. And then this black that you see inside and around the edge here, that's the same stuff. It's just applied thicker and more layers of it so that it became dark to where it was utterly opaque and you can't see through it at all. But it protects this wooden cup very well, and so it can be it can be an amber color, or it can be black, and it reacts with different materials differently, which is kind of interesting. This is a piece of old growth fir from the Pacific Northwest. I do some wood carving of spoons and such, and this one was going to be a spatula, and it came out so precisely, after carving it and doing some light sanding, that I thought, hey, what if I coated this with urushi? That might be kind of interesting to see what would happen. And as soon as the urushi touched the pine, it turned pitch black. It just reacted so strongly with it that there was no possibility of it ever taking the lighter color. It just went black. And I think that that was a reaction. Although, you probably can't see it here, but I can see faintly through it here a little bit. And there are places where the sanding got a little bit thin, or rubbing or whatever got a little thin, and you can start to see the wood underneath. But it's got this almost piano black darkness to it on this piece of wood. But here we're talking about pens, and the reason I'm talking about it today is because I just finished a series of pens, and I just want to talk about my little sojourn with Urushi in fountain pens. I started off just being curious about it, and I had a bunch of Indian pens that were made out of these different colors of ebonite, and I know that ebonite is the base for most of the Japanese-made urushi pens, such as this Namiki Emperor and this Pilot Custom Urushi. The bodies of these pens are made out of ebonite, probably black, and then coated with black urushi. And the feel and the texture of urushi is unlike anything else you will encounter. It's very interesting the way it feels, and it's very nice. And they are not inexpensive pens because of the labor and time that it takes to do urushi. And I guess I could say something about that. When you work urushi, you're basically going to be brushing it onto a surface, and then you have to cure it. The way you cure it is that you have to put it into a chamber where it is humid and warm, and that makes it cure very quickly. If you do not do that, it will just sit there and stay sticky and gross forever. It just won't cure at all. I had a piece that I tried to do just by, I thought, being in the Pacific Northwest, it's humid here, maybe it would cure. It did not. It stayed sticky for weeks. I ended up having to clean it off and then start over again. And then I made myself a chamber in which to cure urushi, which is basically just a plastic container that has a sealing lid. And I attached a couple of rotisserie motors to that because when you first apply urushi, particularly to metals, it does not cure very quickly. The first coat always takes the longest. And if it just sits there in one position, it can puddle to one side of the piece or the other. And so having them rotate does better. And actually, the first thing I did urushi on was made out of brass. And this is it. This is a Jinhao 159. I was just experimenting with urushi. I was just learning how to use it, and I figured it would be a great, So what happened was this pen was coated. It's a brass pen that was coated in a black lacquer. It's an inexpensive pen from China, and the lacquer peeled off of the body. And these two sections here that you can see are kind of greenish. That's where the lacquer peeled off. And so I figured, hey, let's try urushi on that. And not knowing how urushi would react with brass like that, it was a learning experience. It took a very long time to cure, and that's how. And I've done a couple other things in brass since then, and that's just how it is. When the first coat of urushi on brass can take up to 2-3 weeks to cure, just because of, I think, of the way that the urushi is reacting with the metal. But once it cures, it's a good hard surface, and it stays on really well. And then you can see I have kind of a swirling color pattern here. Basically, I mixed some glitter, some gold glitter with the urushi, and then painted it on. And it came out in this interesting green color, and I think it's just because the layers of urushi above it just kind of made it come out in that color, which I kind of like. Anyway, so urushi requires that you coat the piece, cure it, and then you have to sand it between each layer that you put on it. I don't remember how many layers this is. It may be a dozen. It was a learning experience for me, and sometimes when I sanded, I sanded it all the way to the brass and had, I basically had a long cure to go, and so and then I finally got kind of frustrated at the end about the finish because I was wanting to get it to be a perfectly smooth, shiny black, but I wasn't getting there, and so I gave up and mixed the the glitter in with it and just brushed it on, and I liked the effect, so I left it alone. I did polish it a little bit afterwards, though, so that it's not perfectly smooth. You can still kind of feel the brush marks. And that's one of the aesthetics about Urushi, too, is that it doesn't all have to be this perfectly smooth black. It can be different finishes. And they have different names for all of them, and I don't know all of the names, and I'm going to say them wrong anyway. So I'll just talk about my experience. Anyway, the one pen I did do in smooth black is one of these jumbo pens. These were made in the 50s. They were kind of novelties. These funky Japanese-made ebonite pens that weren't even really intended to work. This one, when I got it, it was obvious from the factory that it would never have worked. It was just kind of a novelty, and it had one thin coat of lacquer on it, and I didn't like it, so I sanded it, and then I put a couple of coats of 2 or 3 coats of Urushi on it to make it nice again. Partly because I wanted it to show off how similar it is to the Emperor. My finish clearly is not as good as the professionals at Namiki, but it came out nice and it has a good feeling to it. So you can make Urushi black and shiny like that, or you can make it kind of an amber color if you lay it on a little bit thinner, and especially if you filter it. And that's one thing I forgot to mention. Raw Urushi, you may order it like this. Inside will be a tube like the one that I showed earlier. The Urushi that's in there is not filtered, meaning that it is just the raw stuff right out of the tree. And so it's going to have some chunks in it. It's not going to be terribly smooth, and it's going to react differently. It tends to go darker faster. And this is part of the reason why these colors are so different here, is that this color here was filtered before I brushed it on, whereas this black, I did not filter it. And filtering it means that you press it through paper. The Japanese have this special paper that they use. You put some of the Urushi into the paper, and then you fold it and you squeeze it through the paper and paint it, and then take that's been and the impurities stay in the paper. I have just used coffee filter paper. I'm sure that people are cringing just hearing me say that, but that's what I've used, and it has worked well for me. It's probably not the best thing in the world to use, but that's what I did. Anyway, when I want an amber finish from the Urushi, that's what I do, is I make sure I filter it. And people, I'm sure, will be cringing, because sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just put it on raw. I don't filter it. Probably should, but I don't always. Anyway, this is one that I did recently. This was I showed it earlier. This is the ebonite pen from India. This is a Ranga. I think it's a model 4C is what it's called. And I wanted kind of a dark tortoise shell look to it, and I don't know if you'll be able to see that there very well, but it looks a lot lighter in person than it is here on camera, where you can see blotches of lighter and darker areas and surfaces, but it's very smooth and very nice to feel, and I think it is much better looking than this swirly, kind of ugly ebonite that it was actually made out of. And I left the section just so you could see what it looked like before. And I may not do anything to change that. I have another one that I made that I did at the same time. I bought 3 or 4 Ranga pens that I wanted to. They were inexpensive, and I was able to grab them for a good price. This one is a very different effect, obviously. This one was originally, the whole pen was this kind of this pale olive color, and it has a bunch of inclusions, like these little black dots of impure ebonite. And it was fine looking, but it was a very rough sanded finish, and it just, to me, it looked kind of blah, and I wanted it to make it look more real. And so what I did is I gave it a couple of coats of the raw Urushi, and it was interesting because in places it didn't want to adhere, and it left these little blotches. And I'm assuming that's because there were oils on the ebonite, and so it didn't stick very well. So that when I sanded it, it came out with this kind of blotchy effect, and it reminded me of some of the bamboo I've seen. And so I left it as is, and I kind of like it. I like the satin. I like the blotchy effect of it, and to me it looks like a more natural-looking piece of bamboo, and it's also a good writing pen. But I left the finials in the raw ebonite as it came to me. And Then to the pen that was kind of like, I don't know how to. This was like the test piece. I wanted to see if I could do Roden work and the eggshell stuff, and I'm sure that there are special words in Japanese that describe the technique for applying eggshell and this abalone shell to to a pen. I just know that they call this Roden, but I don't know the word for the eggshell. Anyway, so this is basically one of those Ranga pens. It was a hideously ugly ebonite. It was swirled orange and blue, which is just disgusting looking, which is part of the reason why I think I got it for such a cheap price. Anyway, I immediately had to change it. You can kind of see inside the cap there the blue and the orange going on there. That's what color it was. And it was kind of a rough sanded. Anyway, so I started coating it with Urushi, and then I applied little strips of abalone shell. And it seems to have come out pretty well. And I didn't know what I was doing. I just stuck it on there, and then I started coating Urushi around it, on top of it. And then in the end, I stuck a bunch of eggshells. And this is, yes, it is hen's egg. I know that the Japanese use quail egg when they do this, but I don't have quail egg available to me. And I did not apply them with the precision that they do. I kind of cheated. I just coated that with Urushi, and then I rolled it in the eggshells and then sanded it afterwards, which is kind of goofy and cheatery, but I just wanted to see how it would work, and it seems to have done okay. I like the kind of the descending. I was thinking of the Aurora Borealis when I did this, and maybe a snowfield under it. But anyway, this was my first attempt at it, and it was kind of a proof of concept before I was going into coating a bunch of pens that were the same body type in different ways of doing Urushi. So a few months ago, I reached out to a pen manufacturer, and they sent me a few of these pen bodies that were not complete and not done. And you can see the materials. I find these materials particularly unappetizing. This orange and blue and black is just goofy. And this green and purple mix, while not terrible to me, I don't know. I'm just not a fan. And then put these two together, and you've got a really awful looking fountain pen. But this is what I started with, 10 of these. And what I did is I started coating them in different ways. And I started off with just a straight coat of Urushi. This is the raw sashime Urushi painted onto those same pen bodies. The same, you can see inside there, it's still that real funny calico and that green and purple. And it's kind of, it looks dark, and it's kind of a dark amber. But if you shine a light on it, you can see inside. You can see that the pattern of the material is still visible in there. That this is basically a dark amber. This is, I think, 4 coats of Urushi, and maybe 5. I lose count because it takes so long, and you have to coat these. You have to let them cure, and the first cure can take a week to 10 days, and then every coat thereafter can take at least 3 days, oftentimes more. And you want to make sure that it's perfectly cured before you sand it and put another coat on it, or it will buckle and crinkle up and look terrible, and you have to start all over again. Anyway, so this one has 4 or 5 coats of that straight raw Urushi, and I sanded off the bottom and polished it because I kind of liked how that green poked through from the material underneath, just as kind of like a little embellishment on this one pen. And the way these will go together is that there is these nib units, these sections, the manufacturer also makes, obviously, because it's their pens, and it would go together like this, and this is what the pen would look like. I think it's kind of elegant. It's just an Urushi coated pen, but it's got some hidden traits underneath. And anyway, so that was the first one. The second one I did exactly the same, but I added some embellishments to it. Maki-e is a process where you apply urushi wet and then add powder to it, and that's kind of what I did here. It's not much; it's just little rings around the cap and the barrel, and then I filled in the little divot on the top of the pen with it too. And this powder here, it's a mix of ruby and gold glitter that I just embedded in the urushi, let it cure, and then anyway, and then you polish it anyway. And then so this pen put together will look kind of a bit different, but it's I know I kind of like this one too, with the little rings there. Okay, and the next one is a piano black, is what I call it. And this is the same thing. It's just coats of urushi over the base pen underneath. But this one I mixed black pigment into. This is a powdered black pigment from an artist store. You mix it in with the urushi, and then you apply it, and it makes it considerably thicker. But it also makes it utterly opaque. You can't shine a light in this and see anything. Where'd that light? There it is. And you see, it's just the light doesn't do anything. You can't see anything through it. It's very dark. Anyway, so that's black, and I just wanted to emulate the black from some of the other pens that are people associate with urushi, because then we have a solid black one, a piano black. Then I did something which I call ishime, which is an urushi technique. I don't know if this was the actual ishime technique that the Japanese and other artists use. Ishime, I think, means rock, and they were trying to get a kind of a lumpy, rough texture, and this clearly is that. I like this one a lot. What I did is it's layers and layers of the same urushi stuff, and then you embed into it powders in a way that it leaves this rough texture. And the powder I used was this gold glitter, so that underneath it you can kind of see it shining through a little bit. It's hard to see on this camera. It's a lot better in person, but you can see the glitter. That it's brighter here, and it gets a little darker in these areas where the urushi is thicker. Anyway, so that's what I call ishime. And then I did kind of variations on the ishime theme, where what I did is I did the same deal with that one, but then I wrapped it first and then peeled off the wrap. And to me, it reminds me a bit of, like a wrapped handle of a sword or something like that. It's got kind of an interesting pattern to it. It's kind of rough and chunky, and it's got a little bit of the wabi-sabi effect going on there. But I like it. That's kind of an interesting one. And then there's kind of a combination between let's see. Let's do this one first. There's another effect where what you do is you will lay down layers of the urushi, and then in a wet layer you will embed the powder. And oftentimes what you'll do is you'll see these pens made this way with gold powder, and then you sand away. You put other layers of urushi on top of it, and then you sand it away until you expose the powder underneath in a blotchy pattern, which it's perfectly smooth to the touch, but underneath it you can see the layers of the dark underneath, the color, and then the color on top, and how they interplay with each other. Instead of doing it in gold, I did it in green, which maybe that's heresy or whatever, but it's different. I kind of like it. It's got a very almost organic feel to it, the way it is. Anyway, that's that one. And then I did one that was kind of a combination of the ishime and that sanding effect, where I did a patterned finish on this one. Instead of being the twists of this one, it's in stripes and in gold powder. And then I sanded away most of it until it's smooth, but so you can see the pattern in there in the gold shimmer. And then I added the rings around the edges like I did with that other pen, and in the finial. So that one's kind of an odd combination pen there. And let's see. And then kind of the one you've seen rolling around here, which is my favorite of them all, is this one. After I figured out that I could do this, I decided I would do it on one of these pens. And this one took me an enormous amount of time, because I wanted it to be perfect. And so what it is there's 3 coats of raw urushi, and then I laid in the strips of abalone shell, and then 2 layers of the piano black, and then roughly 10 layers of clear. And the clear took forever, just because I wanted it to be perfectly smooth and not sand away any of the abalone shell or any of the black. And so this one took a lot of time to do, but I think it came out beautifully. But messing on that, I wanted to kind of do an alternate version where I took squares of the Roden and embedded them in a pattern around the barrel and the cap, and also did the same sort of thing where it's the same layers and everything, but I mixed a little bit of the green glitter into the urushi itself. You probably can't see it on camera, but it's got a little bit of a sparkly effect inside it, and it's very subtle inside, but you can still see the Roden coming through. And then the last one I did is this one here, where I combined the same effects that I'd done before on this pen, where I put the eggshell here in a very random pattern, and then I put Roden around the ends of the pen, and again in a very random pattern, and embedded in the urushi itself is a blue glitter, which I then finished off the top of the pen with a silver blue. And I, tongue-in-cheek kind of call this one Snow and Ice, because it kind of seems like, snow and ice, obviously. But the glittery Roden looks really nice, and it's kind of a bit too random maybe for some people to appreciate, but it's perfectly smooth. You don't feel any bumps on it, and it takes a long time to make that happen. And so one takeaway here from all that you've seen is that urushi takes a long time. You need to appreciate it for what it is. It is an art, and it for those people who know what they're doing, and I'm not one of them, it is exquisite. It is an art that is a high art form. I understand that the folks in Japan who do this live in a particular town that has suffered some flood damage, and so if you've been thinking about buying something for urushi from Japan, please do so. It is, if it's within your budget. It's not in mine. It's too well. It hasn't been for some time, but I was able to buy a couple of pieces. But the folks who do the true urushi artwork in Japan deserve the credit for what they do, and it is a beautiful art form. But it's something you might be able to dabble in yourself if you can figure out how to do it. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I think I've had some fun with it and made some interesting things. Anyway, I think that's enough for today. Thanks. Have a good one.